Hello, everyone. A very, very good morning to everyone here. Thank you so much for joining us today in this discussion. I'm Priyanka Sami, the Global Gender and Intersectionality Lead at the International Budget Partnership. It is truly an honor to be moderating this session. It's a very important conversation today on financing the Gender Transformative Agenda here at CSW 69. This event is proudly co-hosted by the International Budget Partnership, the Senegalese Federation of Inhabitants, FSA Senegal, Himpunan Wanita Disabilitas Indonesia, HWDI Indonesia, Civic, and Equal Measures 2030, a collective deeply committed to advancing gender equality and intersectional justice in public financing and governance. We're gathered here today to reflect on a critical question. How can financing systems, national, international, and multilateral, truly support gender transformative agendas that center the rights, leadership, and priorities of women, girls, and gender diverse people, especially those from historically marginalized communities? I'm deeply privileged to be joined today by an illustrious panel of speakers who are leaders, activists, and experts who bring rich perspectives from across regions, movements, and sectors. Let me begin by introducing our remarkable panel. We have Astu from the Senegalese Federation of Women in Informal Settlements. Astu is a community leader and head of data collection at FSJ, a champion of women's economic empowerment, an exceptional community mobilizer. Astu has made community service a lifetime commitment through data collection initiatives, awareness raising campaigns, and advocacy. Astu mobilizes women's movements and vulnerable communities in informal settlements in the fight against recurrent floods and advocacy for the improvement of the living conditions of communities in resource-deprived areas. Astu supervises and coordinates various data collection initiatives, notably the flagship Know Your City campaign, which brings together women around mapping using innovative technology, focus group discussions, and mass advocacy campaigns. I welcome you, Astu. To my left, we have Rina Prasarani from HWDI Indonesia. Rina exemplifies resilience as a woman with visual impairment, single mother, and a disability rights activist. Rina advocates for the rights of persons with disabilities, contributing to transformative policies such as Indonesia's ratification of the CRPD and Law Number 8 of 2016 on persons with disabilities. As the second Vice President of HWDI for Advocacy and Raising Awareness, Rina has advanced disability-inclusive policies, emphasizing equitable resource allocation and the inclusion of women with disabilities in decision-making. Supported by the International Budget Partnership, she promotes disability-inclusive budgeting and addressing systemic barriers, particularly in health and governance, to ensure no one is left behind. Very welcome, Rina. Here. Good morning, everyone. And to my far left, we have Julissa Tambunan from Equal Measures 2030. Julissa is the Deputy Executive Director and Head of Partnerships and Learning at Equal Measures 2030, a global coalition of civil society organizations advocating for women's rights and gender equality through the power of data. She co-leads EM 2030 Secretariat, driving partnerships, data-driven advocacy, and grant-making, ensuring the work is grounded in shared learning, collaboration, and collective impact. Thank you for joining us, Julissa. And to my far right here, we have Jessalina Rana from Civic. Jessalina is a human rights lawyer in the UN advisor and is the UN advisor at Civic's New York hub, where she leads research and analysis on international law and policy, advocates for meaningful civil society participation at the UN, and advises the UN and member states on global civic space issues. Previously at Amnesty International Nepal, she played a key role in legal reforms on rape laws, citizenship laws, and acid violence legislation. Jesselina is a graduate of Harvard Law School, and I thank you for joining us, and thank all the panelists for co-hosting this event with the International Budget Partnership today. I would also like to warmly welcome our interpreters, Bertrand and Daniel. Thank you both for supporting us with interpretation today and helping make this conversation more accessible. They will be providing French and English interpretation throughout the session. Thank you both. So before we dive into the panel discussion, I'd like to take a moment to ground us in the agenda and purpose of today's session. Why are we here and what we hope to achieve together? This session is anchored in the Beijing Platform for Action's focus on women and the economy. We're here to examine how inclusive and equitable public finance systems can break down structural barriers faced by women and girls, particularly from historically excluded and marginalized communities. We aim to spotlight the power of feminist and social movements in generating community-driven evidence that influences policies, reshapes how public resources are mobilized and allocated, and drives systemic reform. In the face of shrinking civil civic space and increasing threats to grassroots organizing, this discussion will center the importance of evidence-based advocacy in advancing gender equity. Together, we'll explore practical strategies to leverage data, evidence, strengthen coalitions and partnerships, and advocacy for gender-responsive policies and public reform. We'll also reflect on ways to strengthen feminist and economic justice movements through collaboration, connecting civil society, data-driven advocacy, and inclusive governance for lasting change. So this will be a panel discussion structured in 2 rounds of questions where panelists will engage in in-depth conversations on key themes of inclusive public finance, data, civil society, all to advance gender equity. After the panel rounds, we'll open the floor for questions and reflections. We look forward to hearing your insights and contributions as part of this collective conversation. So over to the panelists now. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to respond, please. Let me start by inviting Astu from the Senegalese Federation of Women in Informal Settlements. So Astu, how has your work in Senegal influenced public policies to better support women in informal settlements? And what are the best practices you can share?
Merci beaucoup, Priyanka. Avant de commencer, nous sommes heureux de participer à cet événement parallèle de la Commission des femmes du CSW 69 Beijing Platform. Et nous remercions notre partenaire IBP, International Budget Partnership, pour l'appui, l'accompagnement et l'encadrement. Nous, femmes des quartiers précaires, avons malheureusement été souvent exclus du budget. Pour y remédier, nous nous sommes assurés une implication d'abord à travers l'utilisation des données collectées lors de nos audits sociaux, ensuite grâce à un meilleur accès aux espaces de prise de décision et enfin par la collaboration avec les élus locaux et ministères sectoriels et services déconcentrés de l'État. Enfin, nous pensons que les données jouent un rôle crucial. Leur traitement et analyse permettent de construire un argumentaire solide pour alimenter notre plaidoyer au niveau local, au niveau des autorités administratives, au niveau des autorités territoriales, mais aussi au niveau du gouvernement central et au niveau du Parlement. Donc, ces données permettent de prendre en compte les politiques publiques locales, les besoins et les défis exprimés par les populations à la base, mais particulièrement les populations vulnérables. Ainsi, nous avons pu aujourd'hui réussir à influencer ces budgets locaux, à mieux faire entendre nos voix et celles des communautés. Cette démarche est importante car nous pensons que le budget devrait être le reflet des besoins des citoyens et devrait, dans ce sens, servir à les prendre en charge. Les prendre en charge nos préoccupations grâce aux informations, aux formations et renforcement de capacité de notre partenaire IBP. Nous avons également réussi à avoir des élus représentant la FSH, représentant les communautés dans les collectivités territoriales, parce que avec ces élections locales de 2022, on a pu avoir plus de 40 conseils municipaux, mais on a pu avoir 8 adjointes au maire. Le défi principal de notre mission est qu'il reste encore beaucoup d'efforts à faire car les acteurs ne comprennent pas suffisamment les aspects liés au budget. Les populations ne comprennent pas, dans leur majorité, les notions de recettes, de mobilisation de ressources et de dépenses efficientes des ressources collectées. Elles n'arrivent pas toujours à connecter les niveaux de services publics au budget. Il faut les aider à connaître le processus d'élaboration des budgets, comme le fait notre partenaire IBP. Nous devons aussi contribuer à investir dans les renforcements de capacité et la sensibilisation des acteurs communautaires sur la planification, l'exécution du budget et son évaluation. L'autre défi à traiter l'autre défi a trait à la volonté publique des décideurs publics. Cependant, nous avons montré à travers nos campagnes lorsque des arguments solides et des évidences sur les services leur sont présentés, ils deviennent plus coopératifs. Ils réalisent en fait que ceci les aide à mieux planifier les projets de leur commune et aux besoins des communautés et répondre aux besoins des communautés. L'État du Sénégal est organisé autour de 2 niveaux. Il y a le gouvernement central et les collectivités territoriales. Au niveau local, nous, la Fédération sénégalaise des habitants, avons réussi à tisser des relations très solides avec les élus locaux. Cela a été possible. Cela a été possible du fait. Nous sommes une fédération de groupements de femmes structurée portant la voix des communautés vulnérables. Nous représentons les citoyens, les habitants et habitantes des quartiers précaires et portons leur aspiration à ce sens. La FSH est un acteur légitime et fiable, mais surtout un allié des élus locaux dans leur mission de service public. D'ailleurs, il nous arrive d'accompagner ces élus, lors de rencontres avec les autorités centrales pour mener ensemble des plaidoyers en faveur de meilleurs services sociaux de base. Nous organisons aussi des dialogues réguliers avec ces élus pour remonter les besoins ressortis de nos campagnes de collecte de données qu'on appelle campagne New City sur l'état de service d'assainissement, d'eau, de santé, d'infrastructures sociales de base en général. Nous profitons de ces rencontres de plaidoyer pour faire la restitution de nos actions et des défis rencontrés par les populations des quartiers précaires afin qu'ils voient comment intégrer dans leur planification budgétaire et leurs initiatives locales. Par ailleurs, dans le cadre de nos activités, la FSH collabore avec les municipalités, les services de l'Office national de l'assainissement du Sénégal, le ministère de l'hydraulique, de l'assainissement et dans le cadre des opérations pré-hivernales OPH pour sensibiliser les populations sur la préservation des ouvrages d'assainissement. La FSS réussit également à influencer l'agenda du gouvernement sur l'assainissement et la gestion des inondations. En contribuant à l'élaboration de documents stratégiques comme le plan décennal de lutte contre les inondations, PDI 2023-2033, nous leur montrons aussi que le partenariat est gagnant et que la FSH œuvre pour le bien-être des populations. Merci de votre attention. Information. Merci, on va faire la force.
Merci beaucoup.
I think the most important point about the absence of robust disaggregated data significantly undermines the potential of our interventions. I think without detailed intersectional data, which is collected by communities, so we're really advocating for community-led collection of intersectional data. So thank you so much. And of course, your point on capacity strengthening initiatives, it just cannot be undermined. And we're so glad that you're on the forefront of that as well. Thank you so much. So over to you, Reena. So if you can tell us in what ways can gender responsive budgeting be more inclusive of women with disabilities, and what strategies have been effective in advocating for specific needs?
Thank you. So, gender responsive budgeting, while a crucial step, often overlooking intersectional realities faced by women with disabilities. To truly be inclusive, it must move beyond the singular focus on gender and actively integrated disability lens. This means disaggregated data to understand the specific needs of women with disabilities. Ensuring budget allocation directly address the barriers they're facing in accessing essential services like reproductive health care, and guaranteeing their meaningful participation in budgeting planning processes. Our advocacy efforts in Indonesia have demonstrated the effectiveness of several strategies. Firstly, conducting social accessibility audit of healthcare facilities provides concrete evidence of the existing barriers, compelling policymakers allocation for necessary improvement. Secondly, providing budget literacy training empowers women with disabilities to direct advocate for their needs and development planning for was required. Thirdly, forming women organization like International Budget Processing Protocol and Initiative. And Sectors with Mitra in Indonesia has amplified our voices and strengthened our impact. We have learned that simply allocated funds is not enough. So we need to ensure that these funds are used effectively and transparently, with performance indicators that reflect the lived experience of women with disabilities. This includes ensuring that procurement processes consider diverse disability needs and also the feedback mechanism is accessible and responsive. Ultimately, inclusive budgeting requires shift in mindset, recognizing that investing in women with disabilities is an investment in a more equitable and just society.
Thank you so much, Reena. I think the point on, budgets need to be responsive to the needs of the communities is a very, very important point. Thank you so much for the work, the great work that you do. So, Jesselina, I just want to ask you, what are the strategies for feminist movements and civil society to sustain advocacy amid shrinking civic spaces?
Thank you. I'm just going to put a timer for myself to be mindful of everyone's time. You said 5 minutes, right, Premier? Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. And thank you firstly to IDP and to Priyanka and the team for having me here, for having Civicus and collaborating and being open to collaborating with us. Civicus is a global alliance of civil society and organizations. Every year we track civic space issues across the world. We have our monitor report which tracks civic space ratings in each country, and we're able to also look at trends. But we also have our state of civil society gather data and information based on what partners like IDP and others have talked about in terms of the work that they're doing, but also in light of the shrinking civic space. Our newest report has in fact come out today, the State of Civil Society reports. I would just like to do a plug on that. But thank you for the question, Priyanka. When we're talking about feminist strategies and feminist movements that have been employing strategies, I think given the state of civic space around the world, a lot of times we do seem disheartened about the women's civic is here so much. I think that impacts the global feminist movement. So today, instead of talking about hypothetical situations and hypothetical analysis of what could work, I do want to take you through some of the successful movements and successes that have been recorded over the past year. We're talking about feminist movements and civil societies and all different types of advocacy efforts and strategies. At the moment, we are seeing about 70% of the world living in restricted civic space conditions. One of the things that we've seen work is building alliances across movements. For example, in Mexico, we saw how the women's rights movement worked alongside the LGBTQI movement to decriminalize same-sex relations, but also to criminalize abortion. And we've seen how cross-movement collaboration impacts and is able to take forward intersectional work. When we're talking about grassroots mobilization, I know my colleagues here all the time have already spoken about it, but just to add to that, we've also seen success in Kazakhstan, where the grassroots movement focused on pushing for legislation that reinstated criminal penalties for battery and improved domestic violence protection. When we're talking about innovative use of technology and social media, in Poland, for example, we've seen how social media has been used to create awareness on reproductive rights. Although the bill has been stopped at the presidential level, there is a bill to increase access to emergency contraception without a prescription. We're also seeing strategic legal advocacy and litigation. For example, in Peru, in March of 2024, a court granted indigenous women access to local rivers, reinforcing their cultural and environmental rights. We're also seeing an increase in creative protests, or what we like to call it artivism, the act of merging activism and art. And I think that's been very interesting to see, especially amongst young people. We've seen a few activists in Nigeria who've been using film, music, poetry, theater, and visual art to inspire youth, especially in activism. And artivism really has come up as a new strategy in response to the dangers of people's lives or actively protesting in the streets and undergoing solidarity. More traditional forms of advocacy, as we've already talked about, is policy advocacy and engaging with decision makers. In Czech Republic, for example, we saw women's rights organizations play a very important role in influencing legal reforms related to rape law and strengthening victim protection. And finally, on international solidarity and advocacy, I think times are very challenging across the world. And one of the things that we really need to focus on is creating networks, collaboration, and being open to different forms of activism and solidarity, even at the international level. While at the same time, those of us who have the privilege of being based at the international level with access, privileged access, I think it is important for us to also prioritize grassroots movements, the data, like you said, that comes out of grassroots movements and localization efforts to really change the balance of power from external actors and actors to local-led leadership efforts. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the most important thing that you said, that even in the face of shrinking civil space across the globe, when movements build alliances, center community voices, and leverage every tool at their disposal, they create paths for sustainable change. So thank you so much for that. Moving on to Julissa from Equal Measures. Can you tell us a little bit about how data-driven advocacy strengthens gender-responsive policy initiatives? Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka. Hello, everyone. Thank you for participating in this discussion. It's very important. Thank you. So, I'm from Equal Measures 2030. We are a coalition. We are a coalition that tries to connect data and evidence with advocacy and action and works together equality. So across our coalition members, I should also mention data is power. And around the world, we know that government have made big commitments using data for protection, the SDGs, national plan. They made big commitments, but these commitments rarely make progress. So this is where data-driven advocacy comes in. So we try to reach that reality. The way we do this and how we basically formulate data-driven advocacy is we believe that data make inequalities visible. So gender-related issues rarely visible in traditional policy data. If you see the official estimate, there's only 20% as gender indicators, and we know that we're not going to achieve the SDGs by 2020 if we don't have a gender equal society. So, with our coalition members, we publish what we call the SDG Gender Index. So, the SDG Gender Index basically we're looking at 56 key areas gender-related indicators to measure progress across the SDGs. We had these areas of 144 countries, and we know that no countries are on track in achieving gender equality by 2030. The global progress with gender equality is an important thing. But this is not just a number, right? This is basically a goal to hold government accountable. And this is where this type of data comes in. It drives accountability. So when this type of data is in the hands of advocate, it basically make them more powerful in showing the government this is where you're making progress, this is where you're going with our coalition members, we work with, for example, an organization in Latin America, where basically they're using both data from our index, but also community data to ensure, to basically collect information around how sexual reproductive health issues and access and advocate for equitable budgeting. And I think the other thing that I would like to mention is data is not just a number. I think what's important is to be narrative relevant. So it tells better stories. It tells better stories when it combined with realities of what like this type of evidence is more powerful to both government and public. So these stories, this narrative data shape better policy, and we see that on the ground again and again that when this type of data is used, surrounded by a strong narrative, government will listen, and gender responsive policy is actually becoming the issue.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I think very important point on data alone is not enough. It needs to be backed with the lived experiences and leadership of women, girls, and gender diverse people from marginalized communities. Then it really becomes a tool for systemic change. So before we jump to our second round of questions, most of us in this room are activists, and we don't do anything in the communities without chants and slogans. So before we head to the next round of questions, I would say gender justice demands, and you would say fiscal justice, and we need to put our fists in the air. Yeah. So I will say gender justice demands, and you all will say fiscal justice, right? Is everyone good with that? Yeah. So gender justice demands fiscal justice. Gender justice demands fiscal justice. Gender justice demands fiscal justice. All right, thank you. Do you want to do another one? Oh, yes. Okay. So I will say every budget decision is, and you will say a justice decision, right? So I will say every budget decision is, and you will say a justice decision. All right? Is it good with everyone? And your fists up, please. So every budget decision is a justice decision. Every gender decision. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm sorry about that. So every budget decision is a justice decision. Every budget decision is a justice decision. Okay, great. Thank you. So we do a second round of questions with the panelists. Astu, I begin with you. What are the biggest challenges in ensuring that public finance reforms truly benefit women in informal settlements? And how can feminist movements and policymakers collaborate with you to overcome barriers?
Merci Priyanka. Pour ces défis, le premier défi que nous avons, les secteurs ou les populations n'ont pas une bonne connaissance des budgets. Mais le plus grand défi, c'est la nomenclature budgétaire. La nomenclature budgétaire est très caduque et ne répond pas aux besoins spécifiques des populations. Donc, ça va nous mener à des plaidoyers qui quittent le local, mais des plaidoyers pour des réformes au niveau parlementaire, à l'Assemblée nationale, pour revisiter la nomenclature budgétaire, pour qu'ils corroborent avec les besoins spécifiques des populations, des femmes et des jeunes et des couches vulnérables.
I think that, budgets are seen as a technical issue, and that makes it very inaccessible to women in the communities. And the International Budget Partnership is really working towards demystifying these very complicated budgetary and public finance management terms and really unpacking it and making it accessible to people in the communities, especially women and girls. So thank you so much for that, Astu. And over to you, Reena. How can public finance systems be strengthened to address the intersecting challenges faced by women with disabilities in Indonesia and beyond?
Our political and economic analysis conducted in collaboration with the International Budget Partnership reveals the budget allocation for reproductive health, specifically dedicated to women with disabilities, is extremely minimal. Only 0.03% of the total health budget. These figures reflect the severe neglect of the specific needs of women with disabilities in health budget planning and allocation. So, this data serves powerful evidence why inclusive budgeting advocacy is crucial to ensure that public resources reach all the segments of society, including women with disabilities. Strengthening public finance systems to address the intersection challenges that faced by women with disabilities requires a multi-pronged step justice principles at every stage. Firstly, we need to ensure that data collection and analysis are intersectional, capturing the diverse experience of women with disabilities across different regions and socio-economic backgrounds. These data should inform policy development and budget allocation, ensuring that resources are targeted to the most pressing. Secondly, we must invest in capacity building for both government officials and civil society organizations. This includes training on disability inclusive budgeting, gender responsive planning, and participatory governance. Empowering women with disabilities to participate in decision-making processes is essential for ensuring that their voices are heard and their needs are met. Thirdly, we need to strengthen the accountability mechanism to ensure that public funds are used effectively and efficiently. This includes promoting fiscal transparency, establish independent oversight bodies, and creating accessible feedback mechanism for women with disabilities. Furthermore, we must recognize that the challenges faced by women with disabilities are not unique to sharing best practices and lessons learned across the country is crucial for developing effective solutions. International collaboration, such as the SPARK program, plays vital roles in fostering knowledge exchange and promoting inclusive budgeting globally. And finally, and most importantly, we must recognize the leadership of women with disabilities. We are not simply the beneficiaries of services. We are agents of change. And by empowering us to lead the advocacy efforts, participating in decision making, and hold governments accountable, we can build public finance system that truly reflect the needs of and aspiration of all women, including women with disabilities. We used to say that nothing about us without us, and after working with the International Budget Participatory, we also say nothing about us without budget.
Important points there that women with disabilities need a seat at the decision-making table. You know, public finances, if they were to be responsive to people with special needs, then those people need to be very much a part of decision-making from the grassroots to the global level. Thank you so much for that, Lena. And moving on to Julissa now. Julissa, what are the strategies to bridge gaps between grassroots evidence and policy decision-making at the national and international level?
Thanks, Priyanka. At Equal Measures, I think one of our core missions is to connect the lived realities of women and girls and policies that shape their lives. Based on our experience, there's a huge disconnect between what's happening on the ground and what's being discussed on the national plans or in a global summit. And I think we know that, like, there's possible, it's not even wrong. it's possible to bridge this gap, and it's very essential in achieving gender equality. So we just completed recently a study, working group study on 4 countries, so Bangladesh, Nicaragua, UK, and Zimbabwe, on the risk to gender inequalities when grassroots organizations and feminist movement are funding or silence. And that formed one report here in this room, that these grassroots movement, feminist movement, are key drivers of progress. They have been systematically sidelined through funding, increasing bureaucracy, and as we mentioned earlier, shrinking civic space. So what are the strategies to bridge the gap? I think one of the most important things is to make sure that we sustain grassroots and feminist organizing and we fund them. So grassroots women right organization who produce this evidence, whether it's around sexual access to sexual health, or education they're struggling to survive. So we need to make sure that in order for them to be able to inform policy, we need to fund them more flexibly and also based on trust. The other thing that I think I still, and what Dr. mentioned earlier, is around capacity. So how do we strengthen capacity for this grassroots movement in basically the realities of advocacy. So we work with our coalition members in making sure that we shape their narratives into advocacy messages that are powerful to decision makers. I think that brings me to another point, which is recognizing all forms of data. There has been obviously a huge emphasis on rigor and statistics, data produced by official institutions. I think it's really important to recognize that it's the evidence on the ground produced by communities that reflect in reality of the reasons to it. We need to bring this to policy level. So bridging the gap between grassroots evidence and policy levels, we need to really recognize that grassroots movement are knowledge holders, and we demand that this type of data grounds. Our coalition member in Kenya, they developed this community dashboard where they work with grassroots women in collecting data to inform multiple policy processes. And that has been really successful. I think we make sure that this type of data is recognized and valued from, we can really use that to the national and international level. I'm going to bring this back to the first one in terms of getting the civic space. I think even the best data means little if activists get civic organized. So in all of the countries that did our research on involving the world, we know that the funding went hand in hand with progressions. So in this shrinking civic spaces, there's a direct correlation where gender equality targets environment. So bridging the gap means protecting civic space and also advocating to donors that their current practice are undermining the grassroots. So whether it's about the emphasis of risk management, about compliance, or measurable outputs, this puts burden on grassroots groups, and we're calling on how to shift this practice so we can basically make sure that we get the role of. So I think those are some of the strategies that we can be able to reach the gap with grassroots evidence and diversity of grassroots processes.
Thank you, for reminding us that transforming gender data into action, let me say transforming gender and intersectional data into action means investing in the capacities of grassroots governments to collect, own, and use that data. I think when local evidence is elevated and connected to global processes such as, CSW, the Beijing +30 review processes, it not only strengthens accountability but also ensures the priorities of women, and especially the most marginalized women, and their communities shape both national, regional, and international agendas. So moving on to you, Jesselina, what are the most effective strategies to link local, national initiatives to international policy making?
Thank you so much, Priyanka. And I know we have a room full of experts, so I don't want to lecture you on how to do it. I'm sure you know it better than me. But I also want to take this opportunity to highlight some of the key places where data, especially this data on transparency and feminist movements around it, can be integrated. As we all know, policy making is a multi-layered process, which starts at the local level, the national, regional, and then the international level. We believe that the international level has a lot to learn from the local level. So I'm going to be providing my recommendations for both the national level and the international level and intersecting priorities that can be part of it. As Priyanka mentioned, we do have bigger platforms like CSW, Beijing Platform for Action, but there are also smaller opportunities that happen at the US very often, some which need traction and some which don't at the national level. For example, last year, the Back to the Future was something that needed more traction than other policy-making processes or outcome documents that look at and possibly look at feminist movements, but also the importance of physical data, especially what is now termed as the economy, and the conversation is going on. But similarly, there are opportunities like financing for development, the World Social Summit, which I will come to, and sometimes, I guess, because of challenges of capacity in terms of resources within the organization, each organization isn't able to contribute to each and every policy process here in New York and beyond. It might be helpful, like I mentioned earlier, to build coalitions and networks that we can collectively advance these processes. So at the national level, when there is a signal at the international level that there is a policy platform to come out, for example, the World Social Summit, each of these processes comes out with an outcome document. At the moment, the practice, what happens is that when the UN designates two co-facilitators or more, which means that model would essentially write the outcome document. So I'm going to use the example of the Back for the Future and the World Social Summit, so it gives you a breakdown of how these processes actually work. So, for example, the World Social Summit is going to take place in Qatar in the first week of November. Now, this year becomes essential for the co-facilitators who are Belgium and Morocco to gather information, not just from member states, but also from civil society, who is a very strong ally to the UN and to these processes. Now, the first step that Morocco and Belgium have taken forward at this moment, before coming up with any document on policy, whether draft or revision one, is they have come out with a food for thought paper. Now, this food for thought paper is just what these two member states think of should come out in the outcome document. Now, it's important for civil society organizations, whether individually or through coalitions, to start working on ideas of what's missing. I went through the document yesterday very briefly. There was no mention of civic space, and there was no mention of the care economy, despite the care economy being reflected in the Back to the Future, which was adopted last year in September. Similarly, the financing for development document, the final document, which will come out in Spain and adopted in Spain in July, that is on revision 1. All of this is available on their website or on the internet. The financing for development is in revision 1, but if you look at the zero draft, where Civic has also contributed some insights into, we don't see a human rights focused language. We don't see information on civic space. There is very briefly mentioned information on the care economy, but we've also received word that there are member states who are not very happy that the care economy is part of the financing for development agenda. Civic has also very clearly written an input, a policy brief input, saying that whenever we're talking about financing for development, it also needs to make sure that that debt cancellation of member states or debt or support for member states needs to be translated where civic-based restrictions are not imposed. Because if we're giving out debt cancellation to countries where civic space is restricted, the money is not going to local actors. It reinforces certain networks of patronage. So some of the recommendations in light of that I would like to provide here, which Civic ourselves have been using, is number one, governments need to prioritize local and national consultations for all relevant policy processes. It's not enough that the international level consultations are held. Civil society at the national level can collaborate closely with the UN resident coordinator. The UN resident coordinator is based in most national offices of the UN, and their priority is to also liaise the government with the civil society. So if you're, for example, if you're seeing a Back for the Future process not taking phone consultations at the national level, it is helpful to reach out to UN resident coordinators to let them know so that they can inform the government to take forward meaningful consultations with civil society. Similarly, a collective civil society push is required to contribute to policy recommendation and implementation. And information from these consultations need to be coordinated and shared with your specific missions here in New York, as well as with the bed movers or the co-facilitators of a particular process. At the international level, unfortunately, the UN policy making is a very state-heavy process, often engaging civil society here in New York as well. However, there are certain states which take forward consultations and civil society groups, and our recommendation would be for civil society groups at the international level also need to push for national and regional consultations. Diplomatic turnover is very high. Every 4 to 5 years, we see diplomatic missions where have different staff. So, when you make a relationship with staff in the diplomatic mission, it means every 4 years you need to continue to do that. There is a big challenge without physical presence in New York. Oftentimes, the information doesn't move outside of the New York bubble. So for those of us here in New York, it's important to give out information and send out information to news networks and coordinate efforts. Just on financing for development and the World Social Summit, the financing for development co-facilitators are Nepal, Norway, Mexico, and Zambia. And the World Social Summit for Development co-facilitators, like I mentioned, are Belgium. And finally, for post-policy adoption and review. Policy-making processes doesn't end once the policy is adopted. It also needs to move forward and review that data. That's where data is very important. There are two important reviews coming up. One is the 2030 Agenda review, 2030, but prior to that, we are back for the future review in 2028. If you have been part of these processes or you have data that informs any of these policies, it would be helpful to start collecting data on what you think would be relevant, so that can be used by member states and by the UN and informed review process. And finally, just one plug. Civicus has the International Civil Society Week in November. This is a place where global civil society will come together to work on both national, local, international policies and important issues on activism. So please do consider joining that as well. Thank you.
Thank you for unpacking these very, opaque global processes. And I think that with upcoming conferences and global events such as the World Social Summit, the Financing for Development, the Pact for the Future, we have key opportunities as civil society to truly push for accountable policy making that reflects lived realities and community priorities. So I'd really like to thank all the panelists for your incredibly rich insights. I would now open the floor for questions and reflections. Please raise your hand. We have one mic. We'll try to pass it around, but it'll be most useful if you can speak loudly. Thank you. Yes, please go ahead.
I can try to speak loudly. Hopefully I'm not yelling.
Could I request you to stand and maybe face the audience? Thank you. Could you introduce yourself and then your report?
My name is Anne Killian. I am the Global Coordinator for Advocacy and Legal Advice Centers at Transparency International. Thank you so much for such a wonderful panel. Really learned so much. Something that I'm curious about, and of course, I mean, it makes sense, I work for Transparency International, is the role of anti-corruption in service delivery. We've seen throughout our work, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa with inclusive service delivery, that it's particularly women and marginalized communities that are most susceptible to the negative effects of corruption. So very interested in what you see as the role of anti-corruption work. And then within this, the role of access to redress for folks that experience corruption and need an access or path to justice forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please stand up. You
everyone, my name is I'm with Society Gender Professional, and I have a question about data systems, because maybe it's going more for journalism. So, considering closed democracies and shrinking spaces for civil society, I heard you talking about the reduction in funding or the elimination of funding for organizations. But now we're also seeing, particularly in the U.S., it's not like data collection and data sets and important statistical work. So I was wondering if that was a trend that also happens in other countries as well. I'm from Paraguay, and what we have is that we don't have visible data at all. Things don't show up in data, and we're not collecting people at all. Now I'm seeing this dismantling, and it was wondering about the neuroimaging.
Thank you. We'll take another question. Thank you.
I speak French. Et je vais m'exprimer en français. Donc, je m'appelle Dorothée. Je suis secrétaire générale et secrétaire des femmes de l'espace syrienne. Je suis venue participer à cette rencontre sur invitation.
I'm here as representative of the Women and Safety Space as part of the ECOWAS.
Yes, Senegal.
From Senegal.
Donc, je suis venue sur invitation de la Fédération sénégalaise des habitants.
And I'm here at the invitation of the Senegalese Federation of Environment.
Je félicite vraiment Priyanka et féliciter les membres de la Fédération qui abattent un travail important au niveau du Sénégal.
Let me congratulate Priyanka and also the members of the Federation who do such important work in Senegal.
Astou a parlé vraiment de choses importantes quand elle dit qu'on méconnaît les budgets. La population ne connaît pas les budgets, ne connaît pas la nomenclature budgétaire. C'est vrai. Parce que moi, je suis élu local au niveau du Sénégal. Et chaque fois qu'on vote des budgets, la population n'est pas présente.
And Astou was right on target when what she said about how ignorant the population is about budgeting and budget nomenclature. That's absolutely true. I happen to be a local elected official in Senegal, and when budgets are announced, the local population is absent.
Et je pense qu'il faudrait inclure dans les budgets ce qu'on appelle le budget sensible au genre, qui n'existe pas dans le budget au niveau des collectivités territoriales. Et là, j'interpelle la fédération pour qu'elle s'active pour l'acte 4 de la décentralisation et profil à l'horizon. Parce que le Sénégal...
Attendez. Okay. Bon, après cette phrase, il faudrait conclure. Mais donc, qu'on interpelle la fédération pour que...
Oui. Donc, pour participer à l'acte 4 de la décentralisation qui se profile à l'horizon au niveau du Sénégal.
And so, we believe in the importance of what's called gender-sensitive budgeting, and because this is really important at the local level. And let me take this opportunity to call upon the Federation for it to play an active role in this budget decentralization, which is on the horizon.
We'll move on to the next question.
Et maintenant, on va passer à la question suivante.
Maintenant, ce que je voudrais préciser.
Now, what I really wanted to specify,
c'est qu'il faudrait appuyer la fédération en maillage territorial au niveau du Sénégal. Parce qu'elles sont présentes sur 4 régions. Alors,
because
nous sommes 14 régions.
we need to, there are 14 regions in Senegal, but the Federation is only present in 4 regions of Senegal. So I would like to take this opportunity to ask you to be present and establish your network throughout the country.
Et relever le défi de la communication, hein?
And that way you can bring the talent of communication.
Thank you very much.
One last question at the back, and then we close this round. Dina.
Thanks, Priyanka. Excellent panel. I think you had opinions of suggestions. My name is Beena Panikal, and I'm the National Campaign for Human Rights. And I've worked with LIV for a very long time. So really excited about this panel, what has come out. But I just attended the regional forum of SDGs in the South and South Pacific region, and one of the very disappointing things that they said was about data. And if you look at the progress of gender and the SDGs of Goal 5, we are actually regressing because they don't have access to data. And one of the questions that we had said was about citizens' data and how, and so many times while we do a lot of work in getting stories from the ground and citizen data, governments don't, and agencies, even UN agencies for that matter, don't consider it as data. So how do we, while we all create alternative reports, etc., how do we bring that into the mainstream to say that this data is also credible data that we're producing? And just because I love budgets, one more question with the permission of the chair, that we have targeted budgeting in India, which is a very progressive, budgets, and I think we have it in Brazil and many other countries as well. Unfortunately for women and women from the marginalized, I come from the Dalit community, these budgets don't really work because at the end, we still don't have budgets allocated for maternity benefits, we don't have schemes and programs for women. So our demand has always been that at least 50% of the targeted budget should go to marginalized women. That's a demand that we've already said, but any reflections on how do we actually implement some of these programs? Because in many countries, the programs are good on paper, but not really reaching where it's supposed to reach. Thank you.
Thank you, Beena. And let the panelists respond. Teresa, would you like to take on your data question?
I think I'll respond to the questions about data system and I guess how data collections have been done in a lot of places. And I think this is also, I can also respond at the same time to the last question. One of the biggest issues about collecting data, especially on gender equality, is not just because the indicators themselves are gender blind. National statistics offices don't have the capacity to do it, but they also don't have incentives, right? So there's no mandate even from the UN. There's no funding available to increase the capacity around it. So I think I've seen a lot of countries that we try to collect data from email or SMS. Next, we don't have any data from the SMS because the type of data that we found there in the same, I guess, standard quality as the other region development industries.
Mécanisme de financement très inclusif, très genré, un mécanisme de financement solidaire, inclusif, citoyen pour la réalisation de projets de réhabilitation du logement durable, d'ouvrages familiers, semi-familiers et d'autres projets communautaires. Mais au niveau central, on collabore avec l'État, avec la collectivité territoriale pour humaniser l'État. Quand il n'y a pas de communauté, il n'y aura pas de pouvoir, il n'y aura pas de gouvernement. Donc il faut humaniser l'État pour qu'il prenne en charge les besoins spécifiques des populations vulnérables à la base dans la nomenclature budgétaire et faire le budget participatif. On a tendance à dire le genre, mais si on fait le budget participatif, ce sera très genré. Toutes les couches de la population vont se retrouver dans le budget, vont être prises en charge dans le budget participatif au niveau des collectivités territoriales. Merci, Père.
Can you hear from the back here? Yeah, okay. So thank you very much. And I understood, I got the message. And that we do want to increase our presence in the various regions. And as a matter of fact, there's a fifth region, which is Civic, and we're moving in there. As far as data collection is concerned, it is extremely important for local communities to gather their own data, because if the communities gather their own data, then we can be sure that the data will be disaggregated. And I should say that there is a fund right now which is going to be a transformational financing fund to deal with inclusive financing, gender-based financing, supportive citizen-based financing for rehabilitation, sustainable housing, and other common projects together with the central government. But we must humanize the central government. And to do that, we need to take into consideration the specific needs of the vulnerable grassroots community. And that's why budgeting is so important. If there is participatory budgeting, it will be gender-based. All the layers of the population will be present, and this will filter up to the central government level. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the questions. I'm not sure if these questions were for me or for the panel in general, but I'd like to just take my hand at it. First, on the anti-corruption in service delivery, thank you for raising that. That's one thing that Civic has been raising, the FFT sort of engagement processes. If you do look at the revision 1 of the draft for financing for development or even the zero draft, but Civic doesn't have capacity to engage completely in the process. We've been collaborating with civil society networks here and did one engagement on the policy like I mentioned. And I think this is something that needs to be raised over and over again, especially when we're talking about service delivery. What we're seeing even in the FFT policy process is that when we're talking about ODA or official development assistance, there is a lack of civil society-led processes that are being reaffirmed in the draft. It is very much, like I said, a state-specific or a private sector-specific process. And that's something that does concern us, especially, like I mentioned, in restricted civic space areas. We are concerned about who is taking forward development assistance and where does it go. So it's definitely something that we've raised, and would encourage you to look into raising if that's something of interest in you. And the second one on UN agencies not considering data, I think that's a trouble that a lot of us have had, including Civic, is we have trends and we have analysis of over 5, 6, 7 years now. But it's always a challenge. I think one of the good practices, especially that comes out during HLPF last year, was shadow reports that come out from civil society, in addition to reports by member states. Colleagues remember had very briefly mentioned that when the government was creating their report for the political forum review of the SDGs, they did have one or two good practices where before preparing the report, the government did a lot was coordinating with society networks, part of the women's rights groups, part of the LGBTQI rights groups, and taking forward more disaggregated data. Because I think when we're talking about data, it also needs disaggregated data. So perhaps that is one sort of good practice that we can consider. But definitely, I think we are constantly pushing and we are open to more ideas on how we can do that and bring access here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We take another 2 questions from the floor and then we'll wrap. So 1, 2, and 3 in the back. Would you like the mic back?
Mine will be quick. My name is Allison Brown, and I am the president of International Alliance of Women. And on our website contact form, we get many requests for partnership, which I interpret to mean we're looking for funding from this old women's organization. And I have to say, we are not a funding organization. We are a political lobbying organization. And I came here in the hopes that I could refer such searches for partnership to the International Budget Partnership so that they can have somebody to turn to secure their own funding.
Thank you, ma'am.
Assalamu alaikum. Merci. Donc, je vais présenter Mme CC, activiste féministe des droits fonciers des femmes. Parmi les films continentales de l'accès des femmes à la terre. Je suis venu en solidarité avec les sœurs du Sénégal sur l'invitation de sœur Tolobet. I listen. Des choses, je voudrais dire en insistant sur les dons. On pose le doigt sur la profondeur des inégalités. Je pense que sur le fond, je suis en phase avec les sœurs de Civic. Je félicite la Fédération du Sénégal. Donc, en 2016, avec l'initiative Kilimanjaro, à Dar es Salaam et à Kilimanjaro en Tanzanie, on avait dit accès de toutes les femmes à la terre. Nous sommes agricultrices, mais nous avons besoin aussi de maisons. Voyez le link. Donc, nous avons eu des avancées. Et ça sera avec plaisir que sur le conseil de Toro de la plateforme de la fédération, je suis de Thiès. S'il n'y a pas une antenne à Thiès, nous vous tendons la main. On sera à Thiès, Inch'Allah. Et on fera des choses ensemble parce que nous avons cette dynamique continentale Women to Kilimanjaro dans tous les pays d'Afrique. Et ici à la CSW, je pense que certaines étaient hier avec nous. Nous, quand on dit Women to Kilimanjaro, c'est des droits, c'est des revendications à mouvement. Nous avons droit à ça. Et nous avons cette approche droit. Et nous basons sur la technicité du protocole de Bâle. Égale répartition de ressources. Je vous remercie.
Daniel, you'll have to be a little louder, please.
Salam alaikum. Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Rich Day. I'm a feminist land rights activist. And I came here thanks to my sister from Senegal. And I was listening in English and I picked some things up. But let me just say that when you insist on the importance of data, you are putting your finger on the depth of the inequality that exists. I don't have time to go into the land issues here, but I'm in sync with my sisters We participated in this in 2016 in the Kilimanjaro Declaration in Dar es Salaam, where we spoke out for the access of all women to land. We are female farmers, but we need houses, and there's been some advances in that. But I've been happy to go along with the Federation here on this, and extend my hand in solidarity to you. Together, we will do things. There is now a continental dynamic in this, and some of you are familiar with the Kilimanjaro Women's Declaration, based on the, but we emphasize a rights-based approach based on Article 15 of the Maputo, demanding a fair distribution of resources.
Thank you, ma'am. We salute all women farmers in Senegal and across the global south. Thank you so much. Stranger, would you like to come up and ask your questions?
I'm loud enough to be heard. I'm Stranger from the Feminist Policy Collective in India and of course the Women Farmers Alliance from India. My question is really, in India we are seeing a huge digitalization of data with zero transparency on where the data is coming, and it's leading to a lot of the exclusions of marginalized community. My question to speakers or anybody else, if IUB has investigated any of these investments that are happening on digitalization of citizen data, and how is it affecting women and marginalized communities?
This is the last one.
I think Priyanka, this we try on that sometimes president will have the rest of the representatives. Is this Priyanka to Shazin de la Pareto? That's an ela pario. Ela pario no is in the different. No angato ensemble travail is constantly the relaxing idea and the personality. Wow.
I want to and proper data collection. I believe we can work together in synergy and of course with our colleagues at the IB. Thank you very much.
Just very quickly on the digitalization of data, we haven't really done a lot of research around the risk of digitalization of data. We've seen how dangerous were data for organizations. I think the risk of community generated data is right. We have to make sure that we protect this data and we use it for the benefit of the people who collect it. So be accountable to it. I think we all have responsibilities in doing this. I think that's a really good point that we have to start thinking about the privacy of data and security of data, especially in the huge technological shift that happens around the world. But probably my colleague executives will research around this already. Thank you so much for the question. I'm happy to connect to, so I'm not part of the research team, but I'm happy to connect to with our research team and generally to more into this. But one of the things that we have been trying to be mindful of both at the UN and at the national level is, especially when we're talking about the global south, say for example South Asia, when we're looking at digitization of data, so much of the conversation is on the advantages, but I think one of the challenges that we acknowledge is who has access to digital literacy in South Asia or beyond in the global south. We do see a big gender divide in digital literacy and how data is accessed in the future. Additionally, we do also recognize how data is sort of taken over in very specific languages, and how we sort of look at data that's being produced and interpreted by the world, mostly in English, from social media to websites. And I think that is something that we need to be mindful of. One of the conversations we're having at the event is unmuting civil society. And as part of these recommendations, we do recommend to everyone to look at the digital, to look at the civic space gap and digital gap, not just from a gender angle, but also from the urban-rural divide, from the gender divide, from the age divide. These are things that we are taking forward, but happy to have a more longer conversation with our research to all the colleagues. So thank you.
Thank you, Jesselina. So as we draw this powerful conversation to a close, I want to answer my question. Sorry. Yes, you can connect with Equal Measures, IBP, and Civicus. And we can talk more after this session. Thank you, ma'am. All right. So as we draw, this powerful conversation to a close, I want to thank my panelists here and also the audience. The speakers really grounded us in lived realities, bold advocacy, and the transformative potential of inclusive public finance. Today we've really seen how feminist movements, disability rights activists, data champions, and of course defenders of civic space are not only challenging the status quo, but really reimagining systems that put rights, leadership, and priorities of marginalized communities at the center, especially of women and girls and gender diverse folks. So I think the message is very clear. Financing the gender transformative agenda is not just about numbers. It's really about a narrative building with a feminist rights-based approach, justice, accountability, and shifting power. As we leave the room, I hope we carry forward the urgency to strengthen transnational solidarities, cross-movement, and community, and really leverage community-led intersectional data collection and evidence to push for systemic change and policy reforms. So I would really like to thank everybody. And before we go, maybe we can chant 2 more slogans if everyone's up for it. Yes or no? Yes. Okay, so I say gender justice is a feminist, and you say is a feminist issue. So, no, sorry about that. Public finance, I would say public finance, and you say is a feminist issue. I say public finance, and then you say human rights issue. Yeah? So, public finance is a feminist issue. Public finance is a human rights issue. Public finance is a feminist issue. Public finance is a human rights issue. And should we do budget decision is a justice decision again? So I will say budget decision is a justice decision. Budget decision is a justice decision. Budget decision is a justice decision. So we have some stickers at the back with these chants on them. So if you're interested, please pick one up. Thank you for being such a fabulous audience, and have a great day ahead. Thank you.